All right, thank you. So we have here, as you see from your notes, an accounting of materials, in particular, the materials of great worth. The jewelry, that is to say, the stones aren't mentioned, but here we have the precious metals that are mentioned. We see that it's recorded by Ithamar. Now, Ithamar was Aaron's youngest son. So he's given this responsibility, and it would have been quite a job. Now, why would it be considered necessary to keep an accounting of this stuff? What difference does it make? Any thoughts on that? I mean, the temple's there and all the stuff's there. What difference does it make how much is recorded? A couple of ideas I had was, number one, it promotes honesty. Okay, so when it's all said and done, there'd better be 29 talents, 730 shekels worth of stuff in there. You ought to be able to go and pretty much figure out that it's there, because let's face it, it's quite a temptation to a lot of people. Also, it's a testimony of God for the people, for their generosity, and also just for how He is working in their midst. So just a couple of ideas why that might be necessary for Ithamar. And it's an enormous responsibility, and he's a young person, so he's probably just a little bit older than Lemuel. Just kidding, Lem. No, it's a big responsibility, so I don't know how old he was, but it would have been huge. In verse 23, we see Oholiab's areas of expertise. Now, it's not mentioned before. It's mentioned before that he was a highly skilled workman, and he's had the ability to teach. But unlike Bezalel, we weren't told previously what his main skills were. Well, here we are. And in verse 23, we see that he was an engraver, so he was able to engrave wood and to engrave metal, etc. And a skilled workman, a weaver in blue, purple, and scarlet material and fine linen. Now, if you were a weaver for purple and scarlet, more than likely, where would you have been working originally? Sharon? Yeah. Yeah, you don't have many commoners wearing scarlet and purple. In fact, the common cloth back at that time would have been a white linen that most people would have worn. I mean, they may have worn some colors, but scarlet and purple would have been worn by royalty. So that tells you that Oholiab worked probably for the royalty making the stuff, which tells you what about him? He's pretty good, right. You're not going to hire somebody who's going to have a bunch of threads dangling out when you don it in front of the people. That's not acceptable. So he is going to be spot on great at what he does. We also see the weights of the metals that are used. In verse 24, we see gold is 29 talents. Now, a talent is about 75 pounds, give or take just a little bit. So that's how much a talent is. So each talent is 75 pounds worth of gold. So I broke that down for us there to see how much modern day worth would be. So that would be about 35,000 ounces. I just want 10 or 15 of those. That's all I'm asking for. Just 10 or 15 in my next trip. Anyway, 35,000 ounces at $1,880 per ounce, which is what it was 2 days ago. And that would have been just short of $64 million. So in today's value, we're looking at $64 million worth of gold that was incorporated in the temple. Silver, in verse 25, we see 100 talents. So there again, 7,500 pounds. Break it down to ounces. It's 120,900 ounces at $22 an ounce, which is about the spot value 2 days ago. We're looking at $2,659,800. So it's a bunch of silver. The source of the silver, in verse 26, it tells us where this silver is from. We know how many people there were. They took a census, 603,000. And whenever they took a census, they were supposed to give an offering for them. It was a half a shekel. Now, a shekel itself is a half ounce of silver. So in other words, they would be asked to give a quarter ounce of silver for each person during the census. And that equates to this whole amount, 100 talents, etc. The use of the silver would have been, as it mentions in verse 27, sockets or bases for the tabernacle walls and structure. Okay, so we're looking at 2 talents per board. So if you remember, we had a structure that had what was called tenons. So you have a board, and then you had a couple of tenons. And what I'm just speculating how this was probably done. You probably had a base of silver here with a hole, and a base of silver here with a hole together, and you'd lower it into that. So in other words, each plank, which is about, if I remember right, 10 or 15 feet high, is secured in 150 pounds of silver. Now, why would that be necessary, that much silver, do you suppose? Yeah, you know, out in the desert, a lot of times, I mean, I don't want what's like there, but in a lot of desert areas, you'll get winds whipping around. And so you want to make sure that this board stays secure. Now, there were other things too. There were other rods and things to help maintain stability. But this is one of the main things right here. Go ahead, Daniel. Right, exactly. That was my next point, which is that silver discourages bacteria growth. So what often happens, of course, you have what's called dry rot, which is a funny name because it's not because the wood's dry. It's because it flakes and falls apart. But it's caused by moisture and by bacteria growing. Silver discourages this from happening. So you'd have the weight to hold it in place. You'd have it there to prevent deterioration and whatnot. Also, another thing that we saw the silver was for was the silver was made for a cap across the top to protect it. I'm sure if it does rain, water won't get in the top and help rot it. And next, there's supposed to be a hook on which the curtain would be attached. So the silver is used for the bases, and the 1,775 shekels was used for a cap across the top of the wood and a hook with which to hang the curtain. Yes, go ahead, Bill. Okay. Ah.
So when you put in any wood or whatever, even concrete, you put it so that the base goes to the ground, and the concrete around it reinforces.
Good. Thanks for mentioning that. Good. Anyone else? I modified this for what Bill all the way through. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. It's nice having somebody here who knows construction, unlike me. Now, I have worked with Bill a few times. You know, Bill's a point and click kind of guy. Jeff, there. Jeff, there. Jeff. I'm just kidding. Bill's a great guy to work with. I'm totally teasing. I don't know. No, go ahead. Likewise.
One of the things that brings out with the workmen, two things. First of all, they're excellent. And a lot of times, Christians have gotten to the point, not Christians, Americans have gotten to the point where they don't always do excellent work. It's okay to do sloppy work, and it's not. Those guys have learned to do excellent work. And God had called them and actually gifted them to their excellent work, which was the second point, is these people were called as craftsmen to do excellent craftsman work. I mean, a lot of times we look at it and say, well, the pastors, the teachers, it's, you know, and everybody else is somewhere down here, which all of us are supposed to be called to do excellence, and we're all gifted to do that, not just the witness, but our witnesses are very good if we do sloppy work, or we don't work hard. And these guys had learned the woodwork and learned to do it well enough that they could do it for kings.
Nice. Thank you. Thanks so much for saying that. Appreciate that. Do our best. Perfect. Thank you. The next item was in verse 29 was bronze. Bronze, there was 70 talents, 70 talents, and 2,400 shekels. That equates to 5,250 pounds. And bronze obviously is a lot cheaper at $2.55 per pound as of 2 days ago. So about $13,400 worth of bronze. And the use of the bronze was to be sockets for the doorway to the tent of meeting and the entrance to the main courtroom. So when you had the tent, let's talk about the courtyard for just a second. So you have the courtyard. You have in here the tabernacle. So right here, you would have sockets or bases of bronze. They wanted bronze there. They also wanted bronze here, the entrance to the tabernacle. So this is where bronze was used, and these bronze were made into sockets the same way as they're made here, only with bronze this time. Also, other things that were used, we had tent pegs and we had utensils. So these things were made, the utensils were made for the altar, the bronze altar, and the tent pegs obviously are meant for everything. They're made for the tabernacle and the courtyard as well. We also see in chapter 39 it says, "Moreover, from the blue, purple, and scarlet material, they made finely woven garments for ministering in the holy place, as well as the holy garments which were for Aaron, just as the Lord had commanded them. He made the ephod of gold and of blue, purple, and scarlet material, and finely twisted linen. Then they hammered out gold sheets and cut them into threads to be woven in with the blue and purple and the scarlet material and the fine linen, the work of a skillful workman." So we have there again, we saw a video earlier a few weeks ago that displayed on YouTube the garments of the high priest. And one of the things they mentioned here, not only do you have this beautiful scarlet and blue, but also you have strips of gold which were cut into very thin strips, and then they were woven in and through the material. We've seen, I just saw some similar stuff at our house the other day with some gift wrap, some ribbon that Linda was using, where they had, I'm guessing fake silver, but woven into the ribbon. It would have looked like that. So as the high priest is walking, you would see glints of sunlight hitting that gold occasionally. It would have been very beautiful. And by the way, archaeology showed that this was the way the Egyptians did it. So again, they got their skill from the Egyptians. The Egyptians would cut the gold into thin layers and would just weave it through. Now gold is crazy because it's so malleable, and if it's thin, you actually can cut it with a pair of scissors. So it's pretty amazing, pretty cool stuff. I've often asked that the Lord, one of my prayers over the years has been that the Lord would weave into my life His Word like gold and burlap in my case, right? Just to make my life of value. That's what I look at it as. So we're going to look next at the completion of the construction. So this is going on, and we're going to look at the completion. So chapter 25, flip back if you would for just a second. We're going back to where Moses was speaking with the Lord, and the Lord gave him the original assignment. So chapter 25 and verse 8 and 9, the Lord is telling Moses, "Let them construct a sanctuary for me, that I may dwell among them, according to all I'm going to show you, as the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furniture, just so you shall construct it." So this is important. This has got to conform to God's specifications. Why? What difference does it make if the sanctuary, if the area here is 150 talents versus 100 talents? What difference does it make if it's 75 versus 125? What difference does it make? Peggy? God is what? Okay. Good. Nice. I appreciate that. Anyone? Heather, go ahead. I saw that hand. And how true is that with God, right? Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Bill?
All this stuff is made for a reason. We try to cut corners, all of a sudden, later on, we didn't understand it, find there was a reason for it. In so many areas, God has said that.
Yes.
So we obey, sometimes blindly, what He says, until we find the wisdom He's bringing to us. Sometimes we won't know that until we actually do obey.
Yes. Very good. And even then, we may not know until we get to heaven, right?
Yeah, when they took a step into the Jordan, they didn't divide until they actually took the step to do it. That's what faith is obeying under understanding.
Good. Excellent. Good point. And not only, I'll go ahead, Michelle. Yes. Exactly. Good point. Julie.
I make quilts, and people show me the size of that quilt, and I say, that's fine, but I don't want to do that. That shows me if it's made so it can stay together,
Oh,
and so the quality, workmanship makes the quilt last.
nice. Good point. Al.
God gave the dimensions and weights of all these things, and it all had to fit together, so you can't decide to say, change something else because it doesn't fit.
Exactly. Good, good, good. Matthew. Matthew's back from college, by the way. Hey, Matthew. Now he's going to walk out, you know.
I think the size and the scope and the dimensions of the tabernacle allowed for a bunch of different people to come together and work on it. God endowed those people with their gifts. So it's almost a chance for him to be glorified twice in what they're making and also how they're using their gifts.
Oh, beautiful. Good, good. Hey, Dean. One point that I wanted to go back to what Michelle made, and that's a very crucial point, and that is the weight. These people are going to be carrying this thing, as it turns out, for over 40 years. You know, they don't know that. They think it's going to be for maybe, well, they don't know. But this thing's going to be carried around all the time. So, you know, we're talking about these bases weighing 75 pounds. Now, I don't know whether they're carried by one person or two, but that's a lot of weight. And that, a healthy man, usually at his prime, say at 63 or so. 36. Anyway, can carry one of these bases for a while, 75 pounds, much more than that, and it starts really, you know, getting difficult. So the Lord has these weights in mind, and as you roll the fabrics up and whatnot, it has to be able to be carried. As well as, these are the dimensions that glorify God. This is the size that all these people can make, and it's just all these facets enter into why God says do it this particular way. It needs to be accurate. But the most important thing is because God is going to dwell there, and He has every right to say, this is the house, the tent, I want to live in. And if you don't make it for me like that, I won't live there. Not to be snooty, but because, you know, he would be saying, not me, I'm God, you know, and this is what I want. And if you want to have fellowship with me as much as I want to with you, you need to make it right. And consequently, that's what they did. So God told Moses this. And so flip back to chapter 39, if you haven't done so. And chapter 39, verse 33, says that they've made it. In verse 33, I'm guessing that it's in pieces here, but nevertheless, they brought the tabernacle to Moses, the tent and all its furnishings, its clasps, its boards, its bars, and its pillars, and its sockets, and the covering of ram skins dyed red, and the covering of porpoise skins, and the screening veil, etc. So they brought them to him, and flip verse 42. So the sons of Israel did all the work according to that the Lord had commanded Moses, and Moses examined all the work, and behold, they had done just as the Lord had commanded. This they had done, so Moses blessed them. We see that Moses inspects the work. He's the only one who can. He's the only one that's seen the pattern. When God was with him on the mountain, he says back in chapter 25, he showed him, I want it to look like this, Moses. So when Moses goes down to look at the articles, he's the only one that can say for certain that they've met God's standards. And we see that the work did meet God's standards. It did, completely. So much so that Moses blesses them. We don't know what the blessing would have been. Would have been, may God bless you for doing such an amazing job. Would have just been, great job, you guys are amazing, which would have been great to hear too, right? But Moses blesses them. You've done it. Great job. Moses knows that God is going to be able to dwell in that tabernacle because they've made it exactly the way they said. We then look at the implementation. So, we just have it in pieces. We don't actually have it put together. So chapter 40 and verse 1, it says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, on the first day of the first month, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. Now, among other things, we're looking here at a timestamp. We actually have a timestamp of how long these folks have been away from Egypt. They've been away just short of a year. So a year has passed, and all the stuff that has happened to them after they left has taken place. So what I'd like to do is flip this around. I'll save the art for later in case somebody wants to take a picture or something, you know. That often happens. It's good not to take yourself too seriously, right? What's transpired in this past year? What's transpired? Left Egypt. With lots of stuff. Right. What else happened? Red Sea. Joe.
I was going to say God showed him this miracle. And God showed him that don't worry that they're coming after you behind. I can set up a wall. I can part the Red Sea. I can take care of you.
Exactly right. Lem, go ahead. Okay, yeah. Food. We'll say water too. Go ahead, Daniel. Oh, yeah, don't forget the not so good parts, right? Grumbling. I'm so glad we're beyond that here in the 21st century, aren't you guys? Lem. The calf thing? Oh, yeah. The calf thing. Okay? Okay. Clouds and fire. I'll say clouds singular. Okay. Mount Sinai. We have fire. Moses' trip. You can't answer, Al. How many times did Moses go up the top of the mountain? What's that? 6. 6 trips. What else do we have? What else happened during this year? Lem. All the tests. Somebody else say something over here? Snakes? We haven't. I don't think we got to the snakes yet. That's something that comes, you know. Yeah, we'll get to the snakes eventually, maybe. Okay, 10 Commandments. Good. Sarah? Sure. Anyway, no, just kidding. What else? It's been an amazing year. What did we just talk about right now? A tabernacle. That's a T. Okay. I thought you were attacking my spelling. Now, who would ever do that? Anything else that you can think of? You might have covered everything. Let me look. The Egyptians who tried to cross the Red Sea wound up all dead. They also heard God's voice from the mountain when it was on fire and quaking and smoking. They heard God's voice and they said, please don't let us hear his voice anymore. That must have been really scary for them to hear, to be so intimidated that they didn't want to hear his voice anymore. They did see that physical manifestation of God in the fire. So when they looked up, they saw, I guess you could say, what results when God's feet touched the earth, smoke and fire. We saw that Moses, when he came down the 6th time, what was different about him than when he went up? He had this glow, right, that the advertisers want everybody to have if you buy their products. But he had a real glow. He also asked for the free will offering for the tabernacle. The construction leaders were chosen, and the construction is completed. And we're going to see that it's going to be put together. And this is all within 1 year. The other year, the things that happened were, you had the 10 plagues, and you had Pharaoh's back and forth with Moses. So this other stuff all happened within a year. What's it? Yes, they were. Yeah. That's true. It does. Yes. So you're traveling, breaking camp, traveling, setting up camp, ongoing. Exactly right. Good job. So there's many firsts in Exodus for sure. 603,000, and that is just the men. It doesn't include the women and children. They figure there's probably about 4 million altogether. I must have misplaced. Oh, isn't it though? Huh. I seem to be missing a sheet. What in the world is that? Huh? Oh, that's right. Yes, they did have a battle. They had a war with the Amalekites. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here at chapter 40. Well, I lost this page of notes, so I'm going to have to wing it just a little bit. Chapter 40 and verse... So God said to Moses, on the first day of the first month, in other words, they left on, I think it's the month of Nisan on the 14th. So that's the first month. And he's going to set up the tabernacle on the first day of the first month. So in other words, it's going to be another 2 weeks until the next Passover. So they'll have time for that. So he's going to have them set it up. And chapter 40, verse 16, thus Moses did, according to all that the Lord had commanded him, so he did. Now, in the first month of the second year, that is after they left, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was erected. So Moses erected the tabernacle, he laid its sockets and set up its boards, inserted its bars, etc. So we have Moses here. He's the one. Now, he didn't do it all, obviously, it's huge, but he had help. So he's the one that's either setting it up directly or he's directing other people as they help him. They're setting it up for the first time. Now, can you imagine what that would have been like to have that set up? It's never been seen before. God has never dwelt among his people before, or people, and you are actually setting up a structure that the God of the universe is going to inhabit. And not only that, but he chose a bunch of slaves to be his people. That's mind-boggling. We could see him choosing us because we're such nice people, right? But seriously, these people would have been regarded by Egyptians as worthless. And here God takes them. And again, as I've mentioned before, it's the first time in human history that a whole people group was liberated from slavery and set free. It's never happened before then. I'm not sure if it's even ever happened again. And so they're set free, and God wants them to make this structure. He's going to inhabit this structure with them. So flip over in chapter 40. We see that Moses did this. If you continue in the chapter, you'll see he set everything up. We're going to see that he anointed Aaron and his sons like he was supposed to. They offered the sacrifices. We see that all that needed to be done for worship is being done. So chapter 40, verse 34, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting. So there again, this cloud is what? This cloud is a physical manifestation of God. Remember that it's been leading them all along. Whenever it would go up, they would walk. Whenever it would come down, they'd set up camp. So now this cloud comes over to the tabernacle, which they've just put up. So keep that in mind. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. What does that look like? What do you think it looks like? Bright light? Okay. Other thoughts? It has to include a cloud because the cloud is there. What else might it look like? Joe? An incredible peace? Okay. That would have been interesting, huh? Joy to the land? Okay, good. Other thoughts? I always picture in my mind a cloud that has shimmering going on, where you have light flashing off and on. It could be multicolored, I don't know, but that's kind of what I envision in my mind. Notice also, it says in verse 35, Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it and the glory of the Lord filled it. So, Moses, I don't know if he was in the tent, but when God appeared, Moses left. So what do you think it was about that presence that made Moses, because remember, Moses has seen this before. Moses saw the glory of the Lord, at least the backside of the Lord, on the mountain. Now he's seeing it again. What is it that's different this time that makes Moses say, I'm out of here? Any thoughts? Okay, looking at it. Okay. Any other thoughts? Peggy? Oh, there's a thought. Yes. What a great thought. Confined space versus out in the open a bit. That's an interesting thought. Mark, did you have something? Okay. That could very well be. You take a look at Isaiah, in chapter 6 or 7, where he says, I'm undone. I'm worthless. Because he's had a glimpse of the Lord. And you're right. It's like looking at yourself in the mirror, but seeing all the bad stuff. Truly. That could have contributed to it. So to give you an idea, some years ago, in the city of Tukwila, north of Tukwila, just before Seattle, we have a steel forgery. It's called Jorgensen Forge, and they actually make steel there. It's kind of somewhat of a secret because they make all sorts of top secret stuff and so I'm talking about it on the air, right? It's in New Jersey, Tukwila, New Jersey, and they make lots of stuff for the military. But anyway, in one morning, I forget what time of the day it was. I think it was like 2 in the morning. They were using incredibly high voltage to convert scrap steel into molten steel. They do it at night because, number one, the electrical draw is so great that it could disrupt the entire city. And number two, because it's so spectacular, they don't want people to see it, essentially. Okay? So they were doing this. Now, sometimes they make a mistake with their work, and there might be a little bit of water left in the vat when they pour the molten steel into it. Now, what happens to water when it changes to steam? It expands 1,600 times instantly. So you take a look at a volume of water, however small it is, and figure it expands 1,600 times instantly. So what happened was they poured this molten steel into the pot, and boom, a big explosion. There's fire everywhere, and they call us, the fire department. Go get them. It's like, oh. And I preface this by saying I never went on a call to that facility that wasn't career defining. In other words, it changes your career, alters it a little bit. I'm serious, because everything was unique and spectacular. I mean, so we're responding. I'm looking at smoke in the air. I'm thinking, oh, dear Lord, as I often did. I was praying. I wasn't being irreverent. And so we get on location. We find out what's happened. So we think the fire might be out, but somebody has to go in and check. So I and my firefighter, Dave, so we go in. We're fully geared up, and we walk around this corner like this, and look, and here is the vat of steel. Now this vat is white hot. You can't look at it because it's so bright. And then something magical happened that I can't explain. We moved without moving. And we moved until we found ourselves behind a barrier that's put there to protect the workers. Now, I'm not saying I didn't move. I didn't sense I was moving. My feet didn't feel like they were moving, but I was moving. That heat was so intense, and the energy was so intense, I couldn't even control myself. And both I and Dave were behind this barrier going, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here either. We're going to go ahead and leave. We were looking for access to the roof because there are different ladders, so we went somewhere else. So I'm talking to an employee after the fact, and he said, as you can imagine, you did what? Well, we were looking for a roof access. He says, you know what? If you didn't have your gear on, either you would have been seriously burned or you would have died instantly. It's so hot. And I talked to him about the movement. He said, oh yeah, it'll move you. It's so hot. So it's like, holy cow. Was it like that? God's presence appears and all of a sudden it's like, it's so bright. Number one, you don't want to look at it. Is it heat? I don't know. But whatever it was, Moses says, I don't want to be here. And he left, and no one else approached it. Now, this happened a couple of other times, too. Can you name another time that this event occurred? Solomon's temple. In 1 Kings 8, the same exact thing happened. The Lord's glory appeared, and everybody left the temple. They were gone. And one more time in the New Testament. Can you remember the New Testament? On the mountain? 3 apostles? Transfiguration, right. So Jesus' appearance metamorphosizes, and they're looking, and he is bright and shining. I don't suppose that they were repelled from him like we're talking about, but they saw him transfigured. So God's glory is amazing. You know, there are people who say, I want God to appear to me right now so I can talk. No, you don't. You know, I mean, like I said, if just in a man-made steel forge, if I wasn't wearing gear when I rounded that corner, I would have been instantly burned and or dead. And that's a physical thing, not God. So how much more? Oh, they also told me if you had hose lines with you, the hose lines would have caught fire. Wow. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Verse 36, throughout all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the sons of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they would not set out until the day when it was taken up. For throughout all their journeys, the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and there was fire in it by night in the sight of all the house of Israel. So I'm guessing that the glory didn't continue. Obviously, they'd have to do their ministry there, incense, lighting the lamps. So the glory probably was there for a set amount of time and then faded. And then when the Lord wants them to move, the cloud goes up and they go, oh, time to break camp, and then they're following the cloud. Now here's a question for us. You're following the cloud. Let's say you decide to, I don't want to follow the cloud today because I really don't feel like walking. What's going to happen to you? Julie? You're going to die, right? Because the man is going with them. The water's going with them. You stay behind, you die because you're in a wilderness. What happens if I decide to break in a sprint ahead of the Lord? You're going to die because all the food is back there with God. All the water's back there with God. If I decide to take it on myself to get ahead of the Lord or go behind the Lord, at least in this situation, I'm dead. And of course, the application is for us, when we follow the Lord and what the Lord wants us to do, we need to be careful to try to stay right with the Lord. Don't get ahead of him. Don't get behind him. But follow along with him, because otherwise bad things happen. We don't want those bad things to happen. So there's many firsts in Exodus. The first time God chose a people, he brought them to freedom. He established contact with this group and says he wants to have a covenant with them. He says, I'll clear the land for you. I'll give you a land flowing in milk and honey. It's going to be great. Oh, by the way, you need to do what? Obey. Just one thing. You just have to obey me. Do what I say. Even if it doesn't make sense to you, go ahead and do it. That's the one thing they had to do. So the temple is built. It's introduced as an all-pervasive light that people cannot be in the presence of. And God will continue to lead them into the land. As wonderful as that is, and it is, it's never ever happened before. And here is a people that God is living among, and he will lead them and he'll be in their presence all the way to the promised land. That's fantastic. But there's something even better. Turn to John chapter 1 just for a moment. John chapter 1, which leads us to Christmas. Verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt. And that word dwelt there can also be translated tabernacled. So think about that and how it fits with what we just talked about. And the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. And we saw his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, John actually did see his glory at the Transfiguration, but everybody saw his glory as he lived among them, doing miracles, transforming lives, preaching, teaching, etc. He did that, for one thing, to teach us and prepare us for his kingdom. Yes, that's very much true. But more importantly, he came here to die for my sins and your sins. I mean, think about that. Linda and I were talking the other day. We went to an event where the pastor was preaching, and his presentation of the gospel was a little bit short. It was short of the sin thing. There's no mention of sin. There's no mention of Jesus dying on the cross for sins. But yet, he invited them to, change their course in life and blah, 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 okay? Well, there's nothing about sin. Well, why should I change my course of my life? I like myself just the way I am. A lot of people might say, right? But Jesus didn't just come to be a nice guy. He didn't just come to teach us. He did those things, but he did it to take God's wrath, so that when God struck him down and crushed him, as it says in Isaiah 53, he did it to Jesus so he wouldn't have to do it to you and me. To give us an opportunity to repent, to admit, I'm a sinner. Yes, God, I am. I'm lost without you. Yes, God, I am. Please, I receive the gift you're offering to me through your Son, Jesus. That's the gospel. That's what it's all about. And Merry Christmas. Any final thoughts? Aaron? Yes. 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 I'd probably be the one to say, Aaron, if you made that ear on that calf a little bit bigger, it'd look more real. Oh, really? Bill, do you have something you want to? Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we oftentimes will argue and say, well, God wouldn't want this for me because I'm not going to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, God's not interested in our happiness primarily, he's interested in our holiness.
Yes.
And to be perfectly obedient is what we're to be. We're supposed to be people of the book.
Yes.
And yet there's so many times that I've seen people not be people of the book who twist what God has to say for their own comfort and convenience in this.
Yes. Very true. A God after their own image. Matthew.
I find it sadly fascinating that even people live in the midst of God's presence, they still walk away from Him. We can see His actual physical presence there, but it's still through the Holy Ghost. So I think it's just certainly needs to be vigilant. And even if He is there, it is a struggle.
Absolutely, because we're so bent. Most of us, myself, we don't know how bent we really are, but we really are. Thanks for sharing, everybody. Let's close in prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for your word. And Lord, I'm looking at Exodus and I'm seeing Jesus, which happens so frequently. And Lord, you tabernacled among the Israelites at the base of Mount Sinai. And then later in Israel, you tabernacled among us in the person of Jesus. And the amazing thing is, in the future, we're going to be in your presence and Jesus' presence in the New Jerusalem. It's all going to come together, go full circle. Thank you for your word. Your word doesn't contradict. Your word enhances and builds up and illuminates. And we thank you. And we do pray, Lord, that you might weave your word into our lives like strands of gold into burlap, that we might have value, that we might have glory, yours. Lord, please be with the following service with Pastor Jason as he preaches your word. Fill him with your spirit, with passion and power and zeal. And may we grow. I pray, Father, further, be with the worship team. Help them to make that joyful noise, Father, and help prepare hearts to receive your word today. In Jesus' name, amen.